Hello, and welcome back to Sleepy America. If you're here for the first time, welcome. You've arrived at exactly the right moment. This channel exists for one reason: to tell the greatest stories in human history, slowly, carefully, the way they deserve to be told. No rushing. No skipping. Just the story, unfolding around you, the way a fire burns down on a cold night, gradually, warmly, completely. And if you've been here before, then you already know what's coming. You know the feeling of settling in, of the world outside going quiet, of the past opening up like a door. We've traveled far together, this family of ours. We walked through Rome, through the mud of the Republic and the marble of the Empire, through Caesar and Augustus and the long, slow unraveling that took centuries to complete. We sailed down the Nile into ancient Egypt, into the age of pharaohs and pyramids, of gods with the heads of animals and a civilization so ancient it makes everything else look young. We sat beneath the olive trees of ancient Greece, in the shadow of the Parthenon, and listened to the birth of democracy and philosophy and the Western world itself. We stood on the shores of Troy and watched that war unfold, 10 years of siege, of heroes and gods and the wooden horse that ended everything. We moved through the jungles of the Yucatan with the Maya, who read the stars like a language and built cities the forest eventually swallowed back. We climbed the mountain temples of the Aztecs, in Tenochtitlan, that impossible city in the lake, where an empire rose on the back of blood and corn and brilliance. And then, the Mongols. Both parts. The storm that came out of the steppe and broke the world open. Genghis Khan. Kublai Khan. The largest contiguous land empire in human history, built in a single lifetime. Each time, we've gone somewhere new. Each time, the world has surprised us. Tonight, we go somewhere different again. Tonight, we travel to a land caught between worlds. Between Europe and Asia. Between Christianity and Islam. Between the ruins of one empire and the birth of something no one saw coming. We travel to Anatolia. To a small, windswept plateau in northwestern Turkey, where a tribe of Turkic nomads, displaced by the very Mongol storm we just traced, found themselves on the edge of a dying empire. No palaces. No gold. No army to speak of. Just a chief, a dream, and a border. From that border, from that dream, would grow the most powerful state in the world. An empire that would last 600 years. An empire that would rule 3 continents. An empire that would swallow Constantinople, threaten Vienna, command the Mediterranean, and shape the modern Middle East in ways we are still living inside of today. This is the story of the Ottoman Empire. And we are starting at the very beginning. Before you drift tonight, I want to ask you something. After this series is complete, where do you want to go next? The Viking Age? The Persian Empire? The Han Dynasty? Medieval Japan? The British Empire? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. This channel goes where you want to go. But for now, settle in. The fire is low. The night is quiet. And somewhere in the hills of Anatolia, in the year 1299, a man named Osman is watching the horizon, thinking about borders, and about what lies beyond them. Let's begin. There is a moment, in the history of every great empire, before it exists. A silence. A stillness. The held breath of the world before it exhales. Something new. To understand the Ottoman Empire, to truly understand how it happened, why it happened, and why it matters, you have to understand what the world looked like in the year 1300. You have to understand what had broken down, What had collapsed? What vacuum had opened in the middle of the earth, waiting to be filled? Because empires do not rise from nothing. They rise from the ruins of other empires. They are born in the gaps that collapse leaves behind. And in 1300 there were gaps everywhere. Begin with Byzantium. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of Rome that refused to die, had once been the most sophisticated state in the Christian world. Constantinople, its capital, sat on a thin triangle of land where Europe touched Asia, where the Bosphorus Strait connected the Black Sea to the Aegean, where east met west in marble and gold. For 1,000 years, Byzantium had held that position. It had survived the fall of Rome, the plague of Justinian, the Arab conquests, the Bulgarian wars, the Crusades. It had been the shield of Europe, the keeper of Roman law, the preserver of Greek philosophy, the center of Orthodox Christianity. But by 1300, the shield was cracked beyond repair. The Fourth Crusade had done something no barbarian horde had managed to do in 1,000 years. It had sacked Constantinople. In 1204, soldiers who had set out to liberate Jerusalem had instead turned on the greatest Christian city in the world, looted it, occupied it, and established a Latin empire. On its ruins, the Byzantines had reconquered their own city in 1261, the Palaiologos dynasty restored, but the empire that returned was a shadow of what had existed before. The treasury was empty. The army was a fraction of its former size. The great landowners had seized power in the provinces. The navy had been sold off piece by piece to pay for mercenaries, who never quite stayed loyal. By 1300, the Byzantine Empire controlled Constantinople and its immediate surroundings, a few patches of Greece, and the western edge of Anatolia. That was it. Everything else had been eaten by enemies on every side. The Bulgarians pressed from the north. The Serbs grew powerful in the Balkans. And from the east, from the Anatolian plateau that Byzantium could no longer adequately defend, something new was stirring. But before we get to what was stirring, we have to look at the other half of the picture. Because Byzantium was only one of the broken powers in this part of the world. The Islamic world, too, was shattered. For centuries, the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad had been the center of the Islamic world, a civilization of extraordinary learning, art, trade, and religious authority. The great library of Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, had preserved and advanced human knowledge while Europe stumbled through its dark ages. The city itself was a wonder, round, walled, and at its peak, perhaps the largest city on earth. In 1258, the Mongols destroyed it. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, brother of Kublai, rode into Baghdad with an army that showed no mercy to walls or libraries or caliphs. The Tigris ran black with ink from the books thrown into it, and red with the blood of its citizens. The last Abbasid caliph, Al-Mustasim, was rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses, the Mongols' preferred method of executing royalty, to avoid spilling noble blood on the ground. It was the end of an era. The caliphate was gone. The center of Sunni Islamic authority vanished overnight. 500 years of accumulated civilization in Baghdad, reduced to rubble and ash. What remained of the Islamic world in the lands west of Persia was fragmented. Egypt had its Mamluk Sultanate, a state run by slave soldiers, who had actually stopped the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260. One of the most consequential battles in history. Syria was contested. The Arabian Peninsula was politically irrelevant. And Anatolia, the great plateau that would become the Ottoman heartland, was a mosaic of small Turkish principalities called beyliks, each ruling a small patch of land. Each jostling against its neighbors, each descended from the great Turkic migration that had begun centuries earlier. To understand those Turkic peoples, you have to go back one more layer. You have to understand the Seljuks. The Seljuk Turks had been the dominant Islamic power in Anatolia since the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the battle where they had shattered the Byzantine army and opened Anatolia to Turkish settlement. The Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, meaning Rome, a reference to the Byzantine Roman heritage of the land they now controlled, had built a prosperous state in central Anatolia, with its capital at Konya. Caravanserais lined the trade routes. Madrasas, religious schools, spread learning. Cities like Shivas and Kayseri became centers of Islamic art and architecture. And then the Mongols came for them, too. At the Battle of Kozdag in 1243, the Mongol Ilkhanate, the branch of the Mongol Empire controlling Persia and surrounding territories, crushed the Seljuk army completely. The Seljuk sultans became vassals of the Mongols, then puppets, then irrelevant. By the end of the 13th century, the Sultanate of Rum had collapsed entirely. The Mongol grip on eastern Anatolia had tightened, but the Mongols never fully occupied the western reaches of the plateau. They were spread too thin. They were fighting their own internal succession wars, their own fragmentation. And so western Anatolia became ungoverned territory. This was the power vacuum. A dying Byzantine Empire to the west, clinging to its walls. A collapsed Seljuk state in the center. A Mongol power in the east that controlled but did not fully occupy. And between all of them, pressed into the borderlands, the frontier zones where Byzantine met Turk, and neither power was quite strong enough to dominate, small tribal chiefs called beys, each ruling their pocket of territory, each raiding across whatever border they could reach, each dreaming of more. These frontier lords were called Ghazis, warriors for the faith, at least. In the ideology that sustained them, men who fought on the edge of the Islamic world against the Christian Byzantines. Whether their motivations were purely religious or more pragmatically opportunistic is a debate historians have had for a century. The answer is probably both. Religion gave purpose and legitimacy to what was also, functionally, an economy built on raiding, tribute, and the slow digestion of Byzantine territory. There were many beyliks. The Karamanids in the south, the Germanids in the west, the Eretna in the center. Dozens of small principalities, each with its own chief, its own ambitions, its own small army of cavalry fighters. One of these beyliks was smaller than most. It sat on the very northwestern edge of Anatolia, pressed against what remained of Byzantine territory, in a region called Bithynia. Its territory was not rich. Its chief was not, by any account, born to greatness in any conventional sense. His tribe had arrived in Anatolia as part of the great Turkic migration, displaced and wandering, and had been granted this frontier posting by the Seljuks as a buffer zone, expendable, difficult, dangerous. The chief's name was Ertugrul, and his son's name was Osman. The world was ready. The vacuum was open. The pieces were in place. All it needed was someone to step into the gap and not step back. The frontier was a strange and violent world. Imagine it, the edge of what Byzantine maps marked as civilization, a line that had been slowly retreating west for 2 centuries, as the great estates of Anatolia fell one by one to Turkish raiders, to drought, to the simple mathematics of a state that could no longer pay its soldiers or defend its walls. Byzantine towns that had stood since the age of Augustus were abandoned, the populations pulling back toward the coast, toward Constantinople, leaving behind churches that became mosques and roads that became uncertain tracks through contested ground. On the other side of that line, the Turkic world was not a single thing. It was dozens of things, dozens of tribes and clans and chiefs, some Muslim for generations, some converts whose Islam sat lightly on older shamanic traditions from the steppe, some nomadic, some semi-settled, all of them bound by the culture of the Ghazi frontier, raiding, warfare, loyalty, honor, and the sense that God favored the bold. In this world, everything was about the raid. The raid was not mere banditry, though it was often indistinguishable from it in practice. The raid was an institution. Successful Ghazi chiefs attracted followers. Followers brought more raids. More raids brought more wealth, more territory, more prestige, more followers. This cycle was self-reinforcing. A chief who raided well became powerful. A chief who stopped raiding, or raided poorly, lost his men to someone who raided better. The frontier was a market for loyalty, and loyalty flowed to success. Into this world, Ertugrul had brought his small tribe sometime in the early 13th century. The legends around him are thick and not entirely reliable. The Ottoman chronicle tradition, like most chronicle traditions, had a habit of retroactively polishing its founding figures to a high shine. What we can say with reasonable confidence is that Ertugrul was a Beylik chief in the Sagat region of northwestern Anatolia, that he maintained some kind of relationship with the declining Seljuk state, and that he successfully passed his position to his son Osman when he died, around 1280. That, in itself, was an achievement. Succession in this world was not automatic. A chief's sons had to earn the tribe's loyalty. Power was granted, not inherited, at least not purely. The fact that Osman took control smoothly suggests either that his father had prepared the ground well, or that Osman's own personality was already formidable enough to command respect. Probably both. Osman I is one of those historical figures who exists at the intersection of legend and documentation, close enough to the beginning of the written record to be partly visible, far enough back that the mist has already gathered around him. What the Ottoman chroniclers wrote about him was written down a century or more after his death, and was shaped by the interests of an empire that needed its founding father to be larger than life. But what comes through, even filtered through hagiography, is a portrait of a man of unusual energy and political intelligence. He was not simply a raider. He was a state builder. The distinction matters enormously. Many Ghazi chiefs raided. Raiding was the economy of the frontier. What Osman did differently, what made his small Beylik into something more, was that he began treating the territory he took not as a source of plunder to be carried off, but as a base to be held, administered, and used as a foundation for the next expansion. When he took a Byzantine town or fortress, he did not simply strip it bare and leave. He garrisoned it. He appointed someone to govern it. He let the existing population stay, in many cases, under the protection of his authority, a pragmatic tolerance that made him less terrifying than conquest usually was, and therefore made his expansion more sustainable. People who weren't killed or enslaved didn't flee. People who didn't flee could be taxed. People who could be taxed funded an army. An army could take the next town. This is how states are built. This is always how states are built. But before we go further into Osman's methods, we have to stop and look at the dream. The dream is, in Ottoman tradition, the founding moment of the empire. More mythological than historical, but mythological in the way that all origin stories are, not literally true, but emotionally and symbolically true in ways that facts alone cannot carry. The story goes like this. Osman was a young man, not yet chief. He was staying in the house of a holy man, a dervish, a Sufi mystic, named Ibali, a man of great religious prestige in the region. During the night, Osman had a dream. In the dream, a moon rose from the chest of Ibali and descended into Osman's own chest. From Osman's navel then grew a great tree, and as it grew, its branches spread until they covered the world. Its roots ran into the mountains of the Caucasus, the Balkans, and the Atlas. Its shade fell over Constantinople, which gleamed below like a jewel between two sapphire rings, the sea on either side. The wind blew, and the leaves of the great tree turned toward Constantinople, and the city became the capital of the world. Osman woke and told the dream to Ibali. Ibali told him, "The tree is your dynasty. The shade is your empire. The jewel is Constantinople. Go and conquer." And then Ibali gave Osman something else, his daughter, Malhun Hatun, as a wife. The spiritual authority of the mystic was joined to the military power of the frontier chief. Sacred legitimacy and temporal ambition bound together in one household, one bloodline, one dream. The Ottoman chronicle tradition says this is where it began. Historians argue about the details. The dream may be apocryphal. The marriage almost certainly happened. But what is not in doubt is what happened next. Osman began to move. In 1299, the date the Ottomans themselves would later claim as the founding year of their state, Osman declared himself independent of the now collapsed Seljuk framework and began raiding Byzantine territory with a new intensity and a new strategic coherence. He pushed toward the wealthy Byzantine city of Bursa, in the valley below Mount Olympus, the Anatolian Olympus, not the Greek one. He struck at Byzantine fortifications along the Sakarya River. He moved carefully, methodically, always consolidating what he took before reaching for more. The Byzantines tried to stop him. In 1301, a Byzantine force marched out to push Osman back. At the Battle of Bapheus, near Nicomedia, Osman's cavalry defeated them decisively. It was not a massive engagement. Osman's forces were still small, a few thousand fighters at most. But it was a statement. The small Beylik on the frontier had met a Byzantine army in open battle and won. Word spread. Followers came. Other Ghazi fighters, looking for a successful chief to ride with, began to arrive at Osman's camp. The tree was beginning to grow. By the time Osman died, sometime around 1323 or 1324, old by the standards of frontier warriors, his Beylik had transformed. The city of Bursa fell. In 1326, perhaps just as Osman was dying, or just after, his son Orhan, who would rule until 1362, would make Bursa the first true Ottoman capital. A city with markets, mosques, madrasas, bathhouses, caravanserais, all the infrastructure of a real state, not a tribal raiding camp. Osman had begun the transformation. Orhan would accelerate it. The dream was becoming something that could be measured in stone. What Osman had created, from nothing, in the span of roughly 30 years, was a principality that had a capital, an administrative structure, a military that could defeat Byzantine armies, and a founding mythology powerful enough to unite disparate followers under a single identity. He had not yet built an empire. He had built the skeleton of one. And into that skeleton, his heirs would breathe fire. The power vacuum that had seemed so chaotic, Byzantium crumbling, the Seljuks gone, the Mongols distracted, the other Beyliks squabbling, had not been filled by the strongest of the competitors. It had been filled by the one who understood, better than the others, that the point was not to raid and move on. The point was to stay. Osman gave them the dream. Orhan gave them the state. When Orhan I took control of the Ottoman Beylik around 1323, he inherited something no other Turkic frontier chief in Anatolia had: a functioning city. Bursa, that prosperous Byzantine town in the valley below Olympus, became his capital, and Orhan understood what a capital meant. A capital was not just a place to winter. A capital was a statement. A capital meant permanence. It meant administration, taxation, law, religion, trade, and the slow accumulation of all the things that turn a tribe into a nation. Orhan built. That is the word that defines his reign. He built mosques and madrasas, hospitals and caravanserais, the physical infrastructure of Islamic civilization brought to his new territories. He minted coins stamped with his name, in the name of God, the most ancient declaration of sovereign authority. He organized his army, beginning the long process of turning the Ghazi cavalry raiders, brave, loyal, and completely undisciplined, into something more systematic. He established administrative offices and began the practice of appointing governors to the territories he controlled. But it was not Orhan's buildings that changed history. It was his geography. Orhan pushed northwest, toward the Marmara Sea, toward the straits that separated Asia from Europe. He took Nicaea in 1331, the city where the Great Christian Council had defined the Nicene Creed in 325 CE, a city of profound symbolic weight for Byzantium. He took Nicomedia in 1337. These were not raids. These were conquests, followed by administration, followed by settlement. And then, in 1346, something extraordinary happened. A Byzantine civil war had torn the empire apart. The Palaiologos family fighting itself, two claimants to the throne, each trying to destroy the other. One of them, John VI Kantakouzenos, made a decision that would prove catastrophic for Byzantium. He asked Orhan for help. He offered Orhan his daughter Theodora in marriage, an Ottoman prince and a Byzantine princess. The frontier chief and the emperor's daughter joined in alliance. Orhan sent his forces to Europe to help Kantakouzenos. His soldiers crossed the Bosphorus, the first significant Ottoman military presence on European soil. They helped Kantakouzenos win his civil war. And then, as the price of their assistance, they asked for something small. A foothold. A little place on the European shore. In 1354, an earthquake destroyed the walls of Gallipoli, the strategic peninsula controlling access to the Dardanelles. Ottoman forces moved in and occupied it before the Byzantines could repair and regarrison it. Gallipoli. From that small peninsula, from that toehold on the edge of Europe, the Ottoman expansion into the Balkans would begin. Everything that came after, the conquest of Thrace, of Bulgaria, of Serbia, of Greece, of Albania, traces back to Gallipoli, traces back to an earthquake and a calculated decision to never give back what the earth had handed them. Orhan died around 1362, having transformed his father's frontier camp into a state that straddled two continents. But it was his son, Murad I, who would truly drive the Ottoman expansion into Europe. Murad I is one of the great conquerors of the medieval world, and one of the least famous in Western popular history. He ruled from 1362 to 1389. And in those 27 years he reshaped southeastern Europe completely. He took Adrianople, Edirne, the major Byzantine city in Thrace, in 1369 and made it his new capital, a statement that the Ottomans were not simply a power in Anatolia anymore. They were a European power now, and they intended to remain one. He pushed into Bulgaria, extracting tribute and vassalage from Bulgarian kings who had no good options. He pushed into Serbia, into Macedonia, into the territories that the Byzantines had once claimed and that a dozen competing Christian lords now squabbled over. The Europeans did not quite know what to make of the Ottomans at first. The Crusade mentality still existed, the idea that Christian kingdoms should band together against the infidel, but in practice, the competing interests of Hungary and Venice, and the Byzantine remnant, and the Serbian kingdom and the Bulgarian Tsardom made unified action nearly impossible. Everyone was too busy watching their neighbors to adequately watch the Ottomans. Murad was also, crucially, a political genius as well as a military one. He married into local dynasties. He appointed local Christian lords as his vassals rather than destroying them, a practice of incorporation rather than annihilation that made his expansion more sustainable and less terrifying than pure conquest would have been. And he created something new, something that would define Ottoman military power for centuries. The Janissaries. The Janissary Corps, the Yeni Kari, the new soldiers, began under Murad I as a revolutionary military institution. The system worked like this: young Christian boys from the Balkan territories, typically between 8 and 12 years old, were taken from their families through a levy called the Divserm, the collection. They were brought to Constantinople, later or to the Ottoman capital, converted to Islam, educated in Ottoman languages and culture, and trained from childhood to be soldiers of the Sultan. They were, in effect, the Sultan's slaves, but slaves in the Ottoman sense, which meant something different than the Western understanding of slavery. They had no family connections, no tribal loyalties, no local power base. Their only loyalty was to the Sultan, and in return, the Sultan gave them everything: training, weapons, salary, prestige, and the possibility of rising to the highest offices in the empire. The genius of the Janissary system was precisely its rupture with the usual sources of military power. Most medieval rulers depended on a nobility that had its own land, its own interests, and its own willingness to fight. That depended on whether the war served those interests. The Janissaries had none of that. They were the Sultan's men, completely, in a way that no feudal knight could be. They were also, when properly trained and equipped, extraordinarily formidable. Disciplined infantry, trained since childhood in warfare, loyal unto death, and eventually armed with gunpowder weapons before most European armies had fully incorporated them. For a century and a half, the Janissary Corps would be the most effective professional infantry force in the Western world. It was a system born of pragmatic ruthlessness and extraordinary vision, and Murad I built it. He died as he had lived, at war. At the Battle of Kosovo in 1389 on the Field of Blackbirds, the Ottoman army met a coalition of Serbian, Bosnian, Bulgarian, and Albanian forces in what became one of the most mythologized battles in Balkan history. The Ottomans won, decisively. The Serbian coalition was shattered. But during or after the battle, Murad I was killed, either assassinated by a Serbian noble who feigned surrender, or killed in the chaos of the battlefield. The sources disagree. What is not disputed is the outcome. The Balkans were Ottoman, and the man who picked up where Murad left off, who took the throne on the very battlefield, as his father's body was still warm, was a man of ferocious, almost frightening energy. His name was Bayezid, and they would call him Yildirim, the Thunderbolt. Osman gave them the dream. Orhan gave them the state. When Orhan I took control of the Ottoman Beylik around 1323, he inherited something no other Turkic frontier chief in Anatolia had: a functioning city. Bursa, that prosperous Byzantine town in the valley below Olympus, became his capital, and Orhan understood what a capital meant. A capital was not just a place to winter. A capital was a statement. A capital meant permanence. It meant administration, taxation, law, religion, trade, and the slow accumulation of all the things that turn a tribe into a nation. Orhan built. That is the word that defines his reign. He built mosques and madrasas, hospitals and caravanserais, the physical infrastructure of Islamic civilization brought to his new territories. He minted coins stamped with his name, in the name of God, the most ancient declaration of sovereign authority. He organized his army, beginning the long process of turning the Ghazi cavalry raiders, brave, loyal, and completely undisciplined, into something more systematic. He established administrative offices and began the practice of appointing governors to the territories he controlled. But it was not Orhan's buildings that changed history. It was his geography. Orhan pushed northwest, toward the Marmara Sea, toward the straits that separated Asia from Europe. He took Nicaea in 1331, the city where the Great Christian Council had defined the Nicene Creed in 325 CE, a city of profound symbolic weight for Byzantium. He took Nicomedia in 1337. These were not raids. These were conquests, followed by administration, followed by settlement. And then, in 1346, something extraordinary happened. A Byzantine civil war had torn the empire apart. The Palaiologos family fighting itself, two claimants to the throne, each trying to destroy the other. One of them, John VI Kantakouzenos, made a decision that would prove catastrophic for Byzantium. He asked Orhan for help. He offered Orhan his daughter Theodora in marriage, an Ottoman prince and a Byzantine princess. The frontier chief and the emperor's daughter joined in alliance. Orhan sent his forces to Europe to help Kantakouzenos. His soldiers crossed the Bosphorus, the first significant Ottoman military presence on European soil. They helped Kantakouzenos win his civil war. And then, as the price of their assistance, they asked for something small. A foothold. A little place on the European shore. In 1354, an earthquake destroyed the walls of Gallipoli, the strategic peninsula controlling access to the Dardanelles. Ottoman forces moved in and occupied it before the Byzantines could repair and regarrison it. Gallipoli. From that small peninsula, from that toehold on the edge of Europe, the Ottoman expansion into the Balkans would begin. Everything that came after, the conquest of Thrace, of Bulgaria, of Serbia, of Greece, of Albania, traces back to Gallipoli, traces back to an earthquake and a calculated decision to never give back what the earth had handed them. Orhan died around 1362, having transformed his father's frontier camp into a state that straddled two continents. But it was his son, Murad I, who would truly drive the Ottoman expansion into Europe. Murad I is one of the great conquerors of the medieval world, and one of the least famous in Western popular history. He ruled from 1362 to 1389. And in those 27 years he reshaped southeastern Europe completely. He took Adrianople, Edirne, the major Byzantine city in Thrace, in 1369, and made it his new capital, a statement that the Ottomans were not simply a power in Anatolia anymore. They were a European power now, and they intended to remain one. He pushed into Bulgaria, extracting tribute and vassalage from Bulgarian kings who had no good options. He pushed into Serbia, into Macedonia, into the territories that the Byzantines had once claimed and that a dozen competing Christian lords now squabbled over. The Europeans did not quite know what to make of the Ottomans at first. The Crusade mentality still existed, the idea that Christian kingdoms should band together against the infidel, but in practice, the competing interests of Hungary and Venice, and the Byzantine remnant, and the Serbian kingdom and the Bulgarian Tsardom made unified action nearly impossible. Everyone was too busy watching their neighbors to adequately watch the Ottomans. Murad was also, crucially, a political genius as well as a military one. He married into local dynasties. He appointed local Christian lords as his vassals rather than destroying them, a practice of incorporation rather than annihilation that made his expansion more sustainable and less terrifying than pure conquest would have been. And he created something new, something that would define Ottoman military power for centuries. The Janissaries. The Janissary Corps, the Yenikari, the new soldiers, began under Murad I as a revolutionary military institution. The system worked like this: young Christian boys from the Balkan territories, typically between 8 and 12 years old, were taken from their families through a levy called the Divserm, the collection. They were brought to Constantinople, later or to the Ottoman capital, converted to Islam, educated in Ottoman languages and culture, and trained from childhood to be soldiers of the Sultan. They were, in effect, the Sultan's slaves, but slaves in the Ottoman sense, which meant something different than the Western understanding of slavery. They had no family connections, no tribal loyalties, no local power base. Their only loyalty was to the Sultan, and in return, the Sultan gave them everything: training, weapons, salary, prestige, and the possibility of rising to the highest offices in the empire. The genius of the Janissary system was precisely its rupture with the usual sources of military power. Most medieval rulers depended on a nobility that had its own land, its own interests, and its own willingness to fight. That depended on whether the war served those interests. The Janissaries had none of that. They were the Sultan's men, completely, in a way that no feudal knight could be. They were also, when properly trained and equipped, extraordinarily formidable. Disciplined infantry, trained since childhood in warfare, loyal unto death, and eventually armed with gunpowder weapons before most European armies had fully incorporated them. For a century and a half, the Janissary Corps would be the most effective professional infantry force in the Western world. It was a system born of pragmatic ruthlessness and extraordinary vision, and Murad I built it. He died as he had lived, at war. At the Battle of Kosovo in 1389 on the Field of Blackbirds, the Ottoman army met a coalition of Serbian, Bosnian, Bulgarian, and Albanian forces in what became one of the most mythologized battles in Balkan history. The Ottomans won, decisively. The Serbian coalition was shattered. But during or after the battle, Murad I was killed, either assassinated by a Serbian noble who feigned surrender, or killed in the chaos of the battlefield. The sources disagree. What is not disputed is the outcome. The Balkans were Ottoman, and the man who picked up where Murad left off, who took the throne on the very battlefield, as his father's body was still warm, was a man of ferocious, almost frightening energy. His name was Bayezid, and they would call him Yildirim, the Thunderbolt. He was 20 years old when his father died on the field of Kosovo. 20 years old, standing on a battlefield still littered with the dead, the air thick with smoke and the particular silence that follows mass violence. His father, Murad I, the man who had remade southeastern Europe, was gone. And Bayezid, without ceremony, without preparation in the field, in the blood, was Sultan. His first act as Sultan was to have his brother Yaqub killed. Yaqub had been commanding a wing of the army at Kosovo. He was a capable general, loyal in battle, and a potential rival for power in the Ottoman system, a system that had not yet developed the formal institution of fratricide that later sultans would codify. The death of a ruler often meant civil war between his sons. Bayezid moved before the sun had set. A messenger was sent with orders. Yaqub was strangled with a bowstring. It was ruthless. It was cold. It was precisely the kind of decision that defined the man and the empire he would build. There would be no civil war. There would be no uncertainty. There was one Sultan, and his name was Bayezid, and he had decided the question before anyone else had time to ask it. The name Yildirim, Thunderbolt, was not given to him ironically. It was given because he moved fast. Astonishingly fast by the standards of medieval warfare and medieval logistics. He seemed to be everywhere at once, crushing a rebellion in Anatolia and then appearing in Bulgaria before anyone expected him, besieging a castle in the Balkans and then swooping down on a Turkic rival in the east, racing from one end of his growing empire to the other with a speed that left enemies, allies, and chroniclers all slightly breathless. He was also genuinely brilliant, at war at least. His strategic instincts were sharp, his reading of the battlefield was fast and accurate. And he had the kind of physical courage that medieval armies required in their leaders, not recklessness, but the willingness to be seen, to be present, to be the center of the storm. Under Bayezid, the Ottoman expansion accelerated in every direction. In the Balkans, he completed the subjugation of Bulgaria, making it a full vassal state. He deepened Ottoman control over Thrace and Macedonia. He pushed into Wallachia, the territory north of the Danube that would much later become famous under a different kind of ruler. He tightened the noose around Constantinople, which by this point was less an empire than a city, with very tall walls and a great deal of history. The Byzantine emperors still sat on their thrones. They still performed the rituals of the court. But they ruled, effectively, at Ottoman sufferance. Bayezid could have taken the city. He chose not to, for now, the walls were formidable. The logistics of a full siege required preparation, and there were other things to do first. In Anatolia, he began the systematic absorption of the other Turkic beyliks, those neighboring principalities that had coexisted with the Ottomans in a tense balance of power since the days of Osman. The Karamanids, the Germanids, the Hamidids, the Saracenids, one by one through diplomacy, marriage, pressure, and outright military conquests, Bayezid folded them into the Ottoman state. This was enormously important. It unified Anatolia under a single authority for the first time since the Seljuk collapse. It doubled the empire's resource base and population. It gave Bayezid the strategic depth to operate on multiple fronts simultaneously. But it also made enemies. The absorbed beyliks resented their absorption. Their ruling families were displaced, sometimes killed, sometimes pensioned off, sometimes married into the Ottoman house, but always diminished. And one of the rulers who was watching this absorption with particular alarm was not a Turkic beylik chief. He was something far more dangerous. But before we come to him, before we come to the collision that would nearly end everything, we have to talk about 1396. About Nicopolis. about the last great crusade. By the mid-1390s, Bayezid had turned his attention back to the Balkans and begun what would become a legendary obsession, the siege of Constantinople. He established a blockade of the city by land and sea. He built a fortress, Anatolia, on the Asian shore of the Bosphorus, controlling the strait's traffic. He cut off Constantinople's supply lines, intending to starve the city into submission rather than break his army against its walls. The Byzantine Emperor Manuel II sent desperate messages to every Christian ruler in Europe. Help us. The city of Constantine, the city of the Hagia Sophia, the last heir of Rome, is about to fall. Europe for once responded. A crusade was organized, the last serious attempt to project Western Christian military power eastward in the medieval tradition. It was led by John the Fearless, son of the Duke of Burgundy, and it drew forces from France, Hungary, the Holy Roman Empire, the Knights Hospitaller, and Venice. An army of perhaps 10,000 to 15,000 mounted knights and infantry marched down the Danube, confident, heavily armored, and, in many cases, tragically overconfident. They met Bayezid at Nicopolis, on the Danube, in September of 1396. The French knights, true to the military culture of their age, charged first, without waiting for a coordinated plan, without reconnaissance, without infantry support. They rode straight into the Ottoman lines with the absolute conviction that heavy French cavalry could break anything it struck. The Ottomans had prepared for this. Bayezid had positioned stakes and infantry in front of his main line. The charging knights crashed into the obstacle, slowed, became disordered. The Ottoman infantry and archers cut them down. And then, when the Christian forces were exhausted and confused, Bayezid released his Sipahi heavy cavalry, his feudal mounted nobles, and his Serbian vassal cavalry under Stefan Lazarevic, who fell on the flanks of the Crusader army. The battle was a catastrophe for the Crusaders. Most of the French knights were killed or captured. The ransoms paid for the survivors bankrupt noble families across France. John the Fearless escaped but carried the humiliation for the rest of his life. The Hungarian king Sigismund fled by boat down the Danube. Nicopolis ended the crusade as a viable military concept for a generation. No Western army would seriously challenge Ottoman power in the Balkans for decades. Bayezid returned to the siege of Constantinople with his prestige at its peak. The city seemed to be only a matter of time. And then, from the east, the storm arrived. The interregnum lasted 11 years. 11 years in which the Ottoman Empire, that remarkable structure, built over a century by Osman and Orhan and Murad and Bayezid, came as close to dissolving as it would ever come again until the very end. Bayezid had 4 sons, Suleiman, Isa, Musa, and Mehmed. Each of them controlled a portion of the fractured empire. Suleiman held the European territories, the Balkans, Thrace, and made his capital in Edirne. Musa and Isa fought over Anatolia. Mehmed held the eastern Anatolian territories around Amasya. What followed was one of the ugliest passages in Ottoman history. Brother against brother. Alliance and betrayal. A son seeking help from Byzantium one year and threatening it the next. A brother making deals with the very Beylik princes his father had spent decades crushing, trading back the territories Bayezid had won in exchange for military support in the civil war. The Byzantines, Manuel II, that desperate, brilliant emperor who had spent years begging Europe for help against the Ottomans, found themselves in the extraordinary position of being kingmakers. They, sheltered Ottoman princes, played the brothers against each other. extracted concessions and tribute in exchange for diplomatic support. For a brief decade, Byzantium breathed again, gained a little room. A little time. Suleiman died in 1411. Isa had died earlier. Musa, the most violent and erratic of the brothers, controlled Thrace and the Balkans by 1411 and spent 2 years raiding Constantinople's walls and terrorizing the Christian populations of his territory with a brutality that even Ottoman contemporaries found excessive. Mehmed moved against him. Mehmed I, the fourth and eventually victorious son, was different from his brothers in ways that are difficult to fully capture but that the sources hint at consistently. He was patient. He was pragmatic. He was willing to wait, to consolidate, to build before striking. While his brothers raced toward each other and burned everything they touched. Mehmed built support methodically in his Anatolian territories, cultivated alliances carefully, and waited for his moment. In 1413, at the Battle of Kamerlin near Sofia, Mehmed's forces met Musa's. Musa was defeated and killed, strangled, in keeping with the tradition of bloodless royal execution that avoided polluting the ground with dynastic blood. Mehmed I entered Edirne as the sole sultan of the Ottoman Empire. His first task was repair. He had inherited something badly damaged. The beyliks that Timur had restored were now independent again, and some of them actively hostile. The Balkan territories, though largely intact, had suffered years of chaotic rule under his brothers. The Janissary Corps, the administrative offices, the financial systems, all needed rebuilding and restaffing. The empire was a house after a storm. The walls still stood, mostly, but everything inside needed to be put back. Mehmed I ruled for 8 years, 1413 to 1421, and in those 8 years, he did something that history does not always honor as much as conquest. He governed. He traveled his territories, settled disputes, restored order, rebuilt the administrative machinery. He made peace where peace was available, with Byzantium, with Venice, with the beyliks where possible, and fought only where he had to. He suppressed a major religious rebellion led by a dervish named Bedreddin, who had attracted enormous support among the disinherited and displaced of Anatolia and the Balkans with a vision of social equality that cut across religious lines. Bedreddin's movement was crushed, but the fact that it arose at all told Mehmed how much damage the interregnum had done to ordinary people. He also suppressed a false claimant, a man who appeared in Anatolia, claiming to be Duzmi Mustafa, another son of Bayezid, and who attracted enough support to be a serious problem. Mehmed dealt with him carefully, because the claim was just plausible enough that killing him required diplomatic finesse as well as military force. Mehmed I died in 1421, at perhaps 40 years old. He is not as famous as his father or his son. He never crusaded across Europe or besieged Constantinople. He never had the thunderous conquests that make the chronicles shine. But without him, there would have been nothing to conquer and nothing to besiege. He gathered the pieces of a shattered empire from the floor and rebuilt them into something that could stand again. He was the glue. His son Murad II was the foundation. Murad II ruled from 1421 to 1451, with one brief and voluntary interruption. And his reign was the hinge between the world Bayezid had broken and the world his own son would transform. He was a man of great military ability, deep personal piety, and a kind of exhausted wisdom that came from spending his entire reign fighting off challenges that should not have existed. His early years were chaotic. The false Mustafa that his father had suppressed had been contained but not eliminated. Byzantium, playing its kingmaker games again, released the pretender in exchange for a territorial concession, hoping to use him to weaken Murad. It was a desperate gamble that briefly worked. Mustafa raised an army, crossed into Europe, attracted support. Murad moved fast, cornered him, and had him hanged. Then he besieged Constantinople, punishment for Byzantine interference, payment demanded for the game they had played. The walls held. The siege failed. But the message was clear: Byzantium's room to maneuver was shrinking to nothing. Murad then faced a younger pretender, his own younger brother Mustafa. A genuine prince this time, set up by Venice and supported by the Karamanids to challenge his authority from Anatolia. This Mustafa, too, was defeated and killed. The pattern was brutal and recurring, and Murad dealt with each challenge in turn with a methodical competence that never looked easy. In Europe, he pushed deeper. He took Thessaloniki from Venice in 1430. The second city of Byzantium, one of the great ports of the Aegean, taken in a siege that lasted less than a week. He campaigned in Albania and Hungary, extending Ottoman pressure toward the edges of Central Europe. He fought the Hungarians under their great commander, John Hunyadi, in a series of engagements that neither side could decisively win. Hunyadi was good, genuinely good, one of the few European commanders of the 15th century who could consistently trouble Ottoman armies in the field. In 1444, exhausted and genuinely longing for the contemplative life that his personal piety suggested to him, Murad did something extraordinary. He abdicated. He signed a peace treaty with Hungary, the Peace of Edirne, and handed the throne to his 12-year-old son, Mehmed, and retired to Manisa to read and pray. It lasted less than a year. The Europeans saw the opportunity. A 12-year-old sultan. A peace treaty they now chose to ignore. Pope Eugene IV preached a new crusade. Hunyadi gathered his army. The young Mehmed wrote desperately to his father. "Come back, the empire is in danger, I am not ready." Murad came back. He took command. At the Battle of Varna, in November 1444, on the Black Sea coast, he met the Crusader army of Vladislaus III, of Poland and Hungary and Hunyadi's veterans. The battle turned on a moment of extraordinary recklessness from the Crusader side. Vladislaus, perhaps inspired by the day's early successes, charged directly at the Ottoman center where Murad stood. His cavalry was cut off, surrounded, and he was killed. The battle collapsed. Another crusade, another catastrophe. Murad returned to Manisa. Mehmed returned to the throne. Murad came back one more time, in 1446, when a Janissary revolt against the young Mehmed's authority forced the abdication of the son and the return of the father. Murad ruled again until his death in February 1451. The last years of his life were spent fighting Hunyadi once more, at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448, another Ottoman victory, and managing the Albanian resistance led by George Kastrioti, known to history as Skanderbeg, the one European commander who would never truly be beaten. In the hills of Albania, Murad too died in his capital Edirne on February 3, 1451. He had fought nearly every year of his reign. He had rebuilt what his grandfather had nearly destroyed through recklessness. He had made the empire strong enough, stable enough, solvent enough to endure. He had trained a Janissary corps that was again the finest infantry in the world. He had created an administrative and financial structure that could sustain major campaigns. He had reconquered Thessaloniki, dominated the Balkans, and left the empire larger and more powerful than he had found it. And he had left, on the throne, a son who was not like him. Not patient. Not tired. Not inclined to retire and read. The son was 21 years old. He had been sultan twice before and been sent away twice before. He had spent his entire adolescence waiting, watching, studying, and obsessing over one thing, one city, one dream that had haunted the Ottoman dynasty since Osman first looked west and imagined what lay beyond the horizon. His name was Mehmed too, and he had Constantinople. Mehmed left his son a house still standing. The walls had cracks in them that only a careful eye could find, but the house stood. And Murad too, who took the throne in 1421 at perhaps 18 years of age, had barely settled into power before those cracks announced themselves. The first challenge came from the most predictable direction. Byzantium, that extraordinary civilization, that empire that refused to finish dying, played the game it had been playing for decades. It released a pretender. The man calling himself Duzmi Mustafa, false. Mustafa had spent years in Byzantine captivity, a piece to be used at the right moment. He claimed to be a son of Bayezid I, an uncle of Murad, the rightful heir. Mehmed had contained him. Byzantine hands had kept him safe, like a card held face down until the table needed turning. The moment had come, they decided. A new young sultan. An empire still rebuilding. The card was played. Mustafa crossed into Thrace with Byzantine support and a small army. And he found followers not because most people genuinely believed his claim, but because the Ottoman frontier was full of men whose fortunes had been scrambled by the interregnum, men who had nothing to lose by joining a rebellion that might reshape the hierarchy in their favor. He took Gallipoli. He took parts of Rumelia. For a brief, uncomfortable stretch of months, the pretender controlled more of Ottoman Europe than the Sultan did. Murad waited. This is the thing that is easy to miss about Murad too. For a man who spent most of his life at war, he was extraordinarily patient. He did not charge at problems. He watched them. He let them develop until their shape was clear, until the moment of maximum advantage revealed itself. Mustafa was overextended, his support thin, his claim unbelievable to anyone who examined it closely. Murad crossed into Europe, moved fast, cornered him, and had him hanged. It took less time than it had taken Mustafa to gather his followers. The second challenge arrived before the first had fully settled. Murad's younger brother, also named Mustafa, this one genuinely a prince of the blood, was set up by Venice and the Karamanid Beylik of Anatolia as a rival claimant. Venice had commercial interests to protect. Ottoman expansion threatened its trade routes, its ports, its centuries-old network of Mediterranean commerce. The Karamanids had longer memories. They remembered Bayezid swallowing their territory, remembered Timur giving it back, feared Murad would eventually come for it again. Together they funded the young prince, gave him a base in Anatolia, gave him soldiers, gave him the fiction of legitimacy. Murad dealt with this too. His brother was caught and executed. By 1423, 2 years into his reign, Murad had eliminated both pretenders and secured his throne. He was 20 years old. What he did next defined his character more than either of those victories. He turned inward. He began to rebuild. The empire that Mehmed had reassembled after the interregnum was functional but fragile, like a bone that has been broken and healed. Strong enough to bear weight, but not yet strong enough to bear the weight it once had. The administrative structures, the tax systems, the military apparatus, the networks of loyalty that connected provincial governors to the capital, all of it needed tending. Murad tended it. He traveled his territories personally. He audited governors. He reformed the Timar system, the grants of land revenue that sustained the Sipahi cavalry to make it more accountable and less susceptible to the corruption that had crept in during the years of civil war. He reorganized the Janissary Corps, tightening its discipline, clarifying its chain of command, rebuilding its training regimen. He was not glamorous about any of this. There are no great chronicles of Murad II sitting in council chambers, reviewing tax records. But the work happened, and the empire felt it. By the mid-1420s, the Ottoman state was functioning at a level it had not managed since before Ankara. And then he looked outward again. In 1430, Murad turned his attention to Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki Salonika was the second city of the Byzantine world. Alexander the Great's city, or at least the city named for his sister. A magnificent port on the Aegean, the commercial heart of northern Greece, a city of perhaps 40,000 people behind its ancient walls. For several years, in a desperate attempt to preserve what little the Byzantine Empire had left, the Byzantines had handed its governance to Venice, offering the Venetians administrative control in exchange for their promise to defend it. Venice had promised. Venice had not delivered. Murad besieged it in March of 1430. The city fell within the week. The speed of it was the message, not the conquest itself. Everyone had known for years that Thessaloniki was ultimately indefensible, without resources that neither Byzantium nor Venice were willing to commit. The message was the speed. 1 week. The second city of Byzantium, fortified and garrisoned and protected by the greatest maritime republic in the Mediterranean, taken in 7 days. Venice paid attention. Byzantium paid attention. Every Christian ruler in the Balkans paid attention. The Ottomans were not weakening. They were not slowing. They were stronger, more organized, more capable than they had been a decade ago, when the interregnum had nearly dissolved them. Whatever had been broken at Ankara and in the years of civil war had been repaired, and the repair was holding. Murad spent the rest of the 1430s consolidating. Serbia was brought into vassalage. Wallachia paid tribute. Albania was partially subdued. Partially, never fully, but we will come to that. The empire expanded. Steadily, methodically, without the lightning speed of Bayezid but with a sustainability that Bayezid had never quite achieved. And through all of it, underneath the campaigns and the administration, and the endless management of an empire with enemies on every border, Murad carried something private. He was a man of genuine intellectual and spiritual depth. He read widely, seriously, in multiple languages. He was drawn to Sufi mysticism, to the interior life, to the question of what lay beyond the visible world. He built mosques in Edirne of exceptional beauty. He patronized scholars and poets. He was, in another life, a man who might have spent his days in a library or a tekka, surrounded by books and the sound of prayer. But he was not in another life. He was in this one. And by 1444, after more than 20 years of an empire that never stopped demanding everything from him, Murad too had made a decision. He was going to put it down. He was going to rest. He was wrong, of course. The world was not going to let him. But for a brief, strange moment in the spring of 1444, he believed it. The Peace of Edirne, signed in the summer of 1444, was supposed to hold for 10 years. It held for 4 months. Murad had negotiated it in good faith, or at least in the faith that Political agreements meant something, that a sworn treaty between sovereigns carried weight even across the divide of religion. He had made real concessions, returning Serbian territories, pulling back from certain Danubian positions, acknowledging Hungarian rights in Wallachia. It was not a cheap peace. He had paid for it. In exchange, he had gotten the quiet he needed. He handed the throne to his 12-year-old son Mehmed, the boy who would one day be called the conqueror, who was at this point simply a nervous child inheriting an empire too large for his shoulders, and retired to Manisa, on the Aegean coast of Anatolia. He surrounded himself with books and theologians and the particular silence of a man who has spent 20 years listening to nothing but war. For a few weeks, it must have been extraordinary. And then Pope Eugene IV issued his ruling: oaths made to infidels are not binding. The Crusade was reborn. It was Cardinal Giuliano Cesarini, a brilliant, reckless, deeply convinced churchman, who drove it. He had been trying to organize a crusade against the Ottomans for years. Now, with Murad apparently retired, with a child on the Ottoman throne, with the peace treaty declared theologically void, the moment seemed perfect. He persuaded King Vladislaus III of Poland and Hungary. He persuaded John Hunyadi, the great Hungarian commander, the one European general who had consistently given Ottoman armies real trouble in the field. He persuaded Venice to send ships to blockade the Bosphorus and prevent Murad from crossing back from Asia. The crusade moved in August of 1444. An army of perhaps 20,000. Hungarian, Polish, Wallachian, Serbian, papal marched toward the Black Sea coast, toward the city of Varna. In Constantinople, the young Mehmed too received the news and did what any 12-year-old ruler of an empire under existential threat would do. He wrote to his father. The letter, in the form that reached later chroniclers, carries a quality of desperate simplicity that cuts through the centuries. If you are the Sultan, come lead your army. If I am the Sultan, then I command you. Come lead my army. Murad came. He crossed the Bosphorus. Venice's fleet, as it happened, failed to close the strait in time, or was bribed to look away, depending on which account you read, and took command. He moved his forces to meet the Crusaders at Varna, on the western shore of the Black Sea, in November of 1444. The battle that followed was one of those engagements where individual human decision, one man's choice in one moment, altered the course of history. The Crusaders fought well in the opening phases. Hunyadi was a genuinely gifted commander, and his forces held discipline and pushed the Ottoman lines in several sectors. For a time, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. And then Vladislaus III, the king, the nominal leader of the crusade, 20 years old and intoxicated perhaps by the day's partial successes, made a choice. He charged. He took his personal cavalry guard and rode directly at the Ottoman center, where Murad's household troops stood. It was the kind of charge that belonged to chansons de geste and tournament grounds, not to the reality of a battlefield where a king's death means an army's collapse. His cavalry was surrounded. His guard was cut down. Vladislaus himself was killed, his head taken, mounted on a lance held high so the Crusader formations could see what had happened to their king. The army dissolved. Hunyadi tried to hold it together. He could not. He escaped barely. By some accounts, spending a night hiding in a Bulgarian village, and made his way back to Hungary carrying the knowledge that the crusade was finished. Cardinal Cesarini, the man who had preached it back into existence, was killed in the rout. His body was never found. Murad returned to Manisa. Mehmed II was Sultan again. And again, it did not last. In 1446, the Janissaries revolted. The Janissary Corps had been the backbone of Ottoman military power for 3 generations. They were also, increasingly, a political force. An institution that had opinions about who should rule and felt entitled to express them. They had known Murad since he was young. They had campaigned with him across Europe and Anatolia. He was their sultan in a way that went beyond formal hierarchy. He was familiar, proven, trusted. The boy Mehmed was a stranger to them, too young, too untested. Surrounded by advisors they didn't know and didn't trust. They revolted. They demanded Murad back. Murad came back. This time, he did not go away again. He ruled from 1446 until his death in February of 1451, 5 more years, and some of the most consequential of his reign. In 1448, he met Hunyadi for the third and final major engagement between them, the Second Battle of Kosovo, on the same field of blackbirds, where his grandfather Murad I had died and Bayezid I had taken the throne. 3 days of fighting. Hunyadi's army better organized, better equipped than at Varna, drawn from Hungary and Wallachia, and the remnants of the crusading tradition was destroyed. Hunyadi escaped again, because Hunyadi always escaped, but his offensive capacity was broken. He would never again take a large army into Ottoman territory. After Kosovo 1448, the Crusade as a concept, the idea that a coalition of Christian kingdoms could push the Ottomans out of the Balkans was effectively dead. Not declared dead, not formally abandoned, but dead in the practical sense that mattered. No one was willing to commit the armies and the treasure to make it real. The Balkans were Ottoman, permanently, irrevocably, for the foreseeable future of everyone alive. In 1448, there remained one thorn. In the mountains of Albania, a man named George Castrioti was fighting a war that by any rational calculation he should have lost years earlier. Skanderbeg, as he is known to history, a corruption of Iskender Bey. Lord Alexander, the name the Ottomans had given him, had a story almost impossibly strange. He had been taken as a boy through the Devshirme levy, raised in the Ottoman court, converted to Islam, trained as an Ottoman officer. He had served the empire that had taken him from his family. He had risen through the ranks. And then, in 1443, during a confused moment in a military campaign, he had deserted, taken a small force, ridden to Albania, converted back to Christianity, and raised the banner of rebellion. What followed was one of the most remarkable military careers of the 15th century. Skanderbeg fought the Ottomans for 25 years from 1443 until his death in 1468, and never lost a major engagement. He used the Albanian mountains the way a master craftsman uses his best tool. Every valley a trap, every ridge a vantage point, every narrow pass a killing ground for larger armies that couldn't maneuver. He defeated Ottoman forces that outnumbered his own by 10 to 1. He raided into Ottoman-held Macedonia and withdrew before pursuit could catch him. He kept Albania independent through a combination of tactical genius, extraordinary personal courage, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain that no Ottoman commander could match. Murad came for him personally, multiple times. In 1450, the Sultan himself led the siege of Kruj, Skanderbeg's main stronghold, perched on a cliff in the Albanian highlands. Murad brought everything: siege, engineers, artillery, massed infantry, the full weight of Ottoman logistics. The siege lasted months. Kruj did not fall. Skanderbeg relieved it. Murad withdrew. It was the last major campaign of Murad II's life. He returned to Edirne, and the exhaustion that had been building for 30 years finally caught him. He died on February 3, 1451. He was perhaps 50 years old. What he left behind was an empire in better condition than he had found. It stronger, more solvent, better administered, more feared. He left a Janissary corps that was again the finest infantry force in the world. He left a treasury that could sustain long campaigns. He left borders that were, with the exception of the Albanian highlands, secure and expanding. He left one thing unfinished. But the man who would finish it was already waiting. His name appears in the sources with different epithets depending on who is writing about him and when. The Ottomans called him Fatih the Conqueror. The Greeks called him the Devil. The European chronicles called him the Grand Turk, the terror of the world, the man who ended an age. He called himself, simply, Sultan. Mehmed II was 21 years old when his father died in February of 1451, and this time there was no one to come back. No retired sultan in Manisa. No father to call when the empire shook. The throne was his. Completely, finally, and he had been preparing for it in ways both deliberate and desperate for his entire conscious life. He had been sultan twice before and been sent away twice before, and whatever that does to a person, whatever it carves into the interior of a young man, to be given absolute power and then have it taken back. To be declared sultan at 12 and then relegated to a provincial governorship at 14, it had made Mehmed II into something that his father, for all his gifts, had never been. Murad had been a builder and a consolidator, a man who fought because the empire required it, and who longed, genuinely, for the life of a scholar. Mehmed had no such longing. Or if he did, it was consumed by something larger. He was, by every account that reaches us, a man of ferocious intellectual appetite combined with ferocious will. He spoke 6 languages: Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Serbian. He read widely and seriously military history, philosophy, theology, geography. He kept copies of the campaigns of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar in his library and studied them not as artifacts of distant greatness but as practical manuals. He commissioned maps. He studied engineering. He corresponded with scholars across the Islamic world and invited Italian humanists to his court, curious about the Renaissance stirring in the West, its rediscovery of the classical world that he himself was steeped in. He was also cold, harder than his father in ways that went beyond necessity. The chronicles, both Ottoman and Byzantine, both admiring and hostile, agree on a portrait of a man who kept his own counsel, who trusted no one completely, who viewed the world with an intelligence that was always slightly in excess of what he revealed. He had learned, in those 2 humiliating removals from the throne, that power was conditional, that even a sultan could be set aside, and he had drawn from that lesson not a philosophy of modesty but one of ruthless self-reliance. When he took the throne in February 1451, his first act was to receive the Ottoman court in formal audience. His second act, according to several sources, was to have his infant half-brother, a potential rival, a future rallying point for discontent, drowned. It was the act of a man who had decided, with complete clarity, that nothing would be left to chance. Nothing. From the first days of his reign, he began planning. The court knew what he was planning. The Byzantine court knew. Venice knew. The papacy knew. Everyone who paid attention to Ottoman affairs knew that the new sultan had a single consuming obsession, had carried It since childhood like an ember in his chest. Constantinople. The city had been there since the founding of the Ottoman state. It sat in the middle of Ottoman territory like a splinter of Byzantine island, surrounded by Ottoman land, connected to the outside world only by the sea, defended by walls that had repelled every assault for 1100 years. It had been besieged by Bayezid. It had been ringed by fortresses. It had been blockaded and starved and threatened and probed. And every time, it had survived partly because of its walls, partly because of geography, partly because of the occasional relief that came by sea from Venice or Genoa. Mehmed had studied every previous siege. He knew where each had failed. He knew the walls, the Theodosian walls on the land side, the sea walls along the Golden Horn and the Marmara, the chain that blocked the harbor entrance. He knew the garrison size, the population, the supply routes. He knew, with the precision of an engineer rather than a dreamer, exactly what it would take to do what no one had managed to do before. He also understood something his predecessors had not fully reckoned with, that the walls which had protected Constantinople for 1,000 years had been built in a world before gunpowder, before artillery, before the cannon. Gunpowder weapons had been developing in the Ottoman arsenal for decades. But what men wanted was something beyond what existed. A cannon large enough to breach walls that had been built to withstand every weapon then known to man. He found a man who could build it. A Hungarian engineer named Orban, who had first offered his services to Constantinople and been turned away for lack of funds, and who then came to Mehmed and found a patron with both the money and the ambition to match his vision. Orban's cannon would be unlike anything the world had seen. It could hurl a stone ball weighing over half a ton. It took 60 oxen to move. It could only be fired 7 times a day, and it required hours of cooling between shots. But each shot struck the ancient walls like the fist of God. By the winter of 1451, Mehmed had begun construction of something else. A fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus, directly across from the Anatolia that Bayezid had built on the Asian side. The new fortress Rumela Hisari, the throat cutter, was built in 4 months, an astonishing feat of organization and labor. When it was complete, Ottoman cannon on both shores could fire on any ship attempting to pass through the Bosphorus without permission. Constantinople was sealed. The city inside the walls, the last 1100 years of Roman civilization, the Hagia Sophia and its mosaics, the palaces and churches and libraries, the Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos and his court and his garrison of perhaps 7,000 men watched the fortress go up and understood what it meant. The last Byzantine emperor sent ambassadors to Mehmed. He asked with what dignity remained available to him, what the Sultan's intentions were. Mehmed's answer was not verbal. In the spring of 1453, he moved his army, perhaps 80,000 men, perhaps more, to the walls of Constantinople. The cannon were dragged into position. The fleet was assembled. The siege engines were built. The supply lines were secured. He was 21 years old. He had been thinking about this city his entire life. The walls of Constantinople had never been breached from the land side. Not by the Avars. Not by the Arabs. Not by the Bulgarians. Not by the Crusaders who had eventually come in through treachery rather than force. Not by his own great-grandfather Bayezid, who had tried and failed and been dragged away by Timur. 1100 years. Mehmed looked at those walls and saw not their history, but their future. Part 2 begins there. At the walls. In the spring of 1453, when the world changed, the empire has survived everything. The Mongols came, and the empire bent nearly to breaking but did not break. The Crusaders came, at Nicopolis, with the flower of French chivalry and the conviction that God was on their side, and the empire swept them from the field. The Civil War came, brother killing brother, the whole edifice cracking from inside, and still it held. Men of patience and will and extraordinary political intelligence gathered the pieces and built it back, stone by stone, institution by institution, until the army was strong again, and the treasury was full, and the janissaries stood ready, and the borders were secure. 6 generations from Osman's small camp on the frontier. 6 generations from a dream in a holy man's house. And now a young man of 21 has taken the throne. He grew up reading the campaigns of Alexander the Great. He speaks 6 languages. He has studied the walls of Constantinople from maps, from accounts, from the reports of engineers and spies. He has commissioned the largest cannon the world has ever seen. He has built a fortress that seals the strait. He has been thinking about this city since he was a boy. His name is Mehmed, and he has one obsession, one dream that has consumed him since childhood. The city his ancestor Osman saw in his sleep, the jewel between 2 rings of sapphire sea. The city that has stood for 1100 years behind walls no army has ever broken from the land. Constantinople. Part 2 is coming.
you